Hi friends, today we have a very special episode as Owlcat Games has kindly supported the channel and provided exclusive information for a very special Xenos race featured in their upcoming Dark Heresy game. Today, we're going to talk about the Tau's tall bird buddies and their most iconic auxiliary, the KROOT. The KROOT are a feral race of Xenos best known for their long-standing relationship with the Tau Empire and for their literal you-are-what-you-eat KROOT abilities. So, if you like funny tall chicken men with magic space guns and Kirby powers, then watch this epic video I made. The KROOT's path to prominence began when an explorer fleet from the Tau Sept Daleth observed them on the world of Krath. Prior to the Tau discovering them, the KROOT had long been at war with the Orcs and were getting overran by the Green Tide. And on Krath, the KROOT were on the verge of defeat. Although they only intended to perform recon, the admiral of the Tau fleet and fire warrior commander couldn't bear to watch the KROOT get slaughtered, so they stepped in. The Tau quickly defeated the Orc forces with their superior firepower, and in battle they forced a relationship with the KROOT. However, the Orcs on Krath are a mere spearhead to a larger war. So then, the Tau and KROOT allied for a greater war, later dubbed the War in the Place of Union. And after triumphing over the Orcs and liberating the KROOT of Krath and the nearby planets, the Tau extended their alliance since the KROOT demonstrated tremendous fighting abilities despite their primitive culture and technology. And so, for a decade, the Tau and KROOT fought alongside each other, liberating all the KROOT worlds of their Orcish invaders. And this liberation campaign culminated in the ultimate liberation of the KROOT's home planet of Pek. And yes, the bird aliens come from a world called Pek. And the blood angels come from a world called Ball, so what's the big deal? Anyways though, after their world was liberated, the greatest KROOT leader of all time, Encore Proc, swore allegiance to the Tau Empire as well as promising regular tithes in gratitude of their invaluable aid against the Orc menace. And the rest was history. The Tau and the KROOT have the strongest relationship of all the auxiliaries, and the KROOT are the most prolific of all the auxiliary species. And so, from their alliance, the Tau shared some of their tech with the KROOT to further enhance their combat prowess, and in turn, the KROOT fight for the greater good and made oaths to never eat their Tau companions, even if that was seen as a great honor in their culture. Which, speaking of, let's talk more about the KROOT's origin and culture. As I've mentioned before, the KROOT hail from the appropriately named world of Pek. The KROOT were a primitive species until an Orc rock crashed on the planet. Some KROOT ate the survivors of the crash, and due to the KROOT's ability to rapidly evolve traits of consumed organisms, the KROOT who ate Orcs became stronger, and some even inherited the Orcs' mech boys' genetic knowledge of engineering. This allowed them to rapidly progress their own technology, and in just a few thousand years, they essentially went from cave birdmen to a society with large industrious hive cities, relatively advanced firearms, and most importantly, warp-capable space travel. They would eventually revert to the old ways though, and largely deindustrialize. But the important thing is that they got warp travel. Having warp travel allowed the KROOT to expand their species across many planets and consume new species for greater evolutionary pathways. And to elaborate on that, we have to talk about perhaps the most iconic aspect of the KROOT, their reproduction. Don't take that the wrong way. I've mentioned it a few times before, but the KROOT essentially have Kirby powers of getting the traits of things they consume. Although the exact mechanisms are not known in lore, KROOT are said to have a significant portion of their DNA blank. And with their blank DNA, the KROOT are able to inherit traits of their prey and alter their genetics if they eat enough of them and eat them for long enough periods of time. And these traits are passed on to their offspring for even more fun craziness. This allows them to specialize in different things needed for their society and rapidly adapt to new planets and battlefield conditions. For example, eating Orcs makes them stronger, eating Eldar can make them faster, and sometimes even Psychers, and my favorite of all, eating Catachan makes them stronger, gives them an affinity for headbands, and a general disrespect for authority. However, this ability can also sometimes backfire, either due to overly extreme mutations putting them on evolutionary dead ends, like in the case of the animalistic KROOT hounds and KROOToks, or from eating forbidden flesh that induces unwanted or even dangerous mutations. For example, eating Tyranids is strictly forbidden as it links KROOT to the hive mind and makes them hostile towards other KROOT since they're now slaves to the Tyranids. And some other notable forbidden meals are Necrons and Chaos Worshippers. And since unguided mutations can lead to disaster, KROOT leaders called Shapers are assigned to Kindreds, which is the name for groups of KROOT. The Shapers are essentially mega nutritionists who can recognize good traits and ensure that their kindred only eats organisms that will induce beneficial changes. In addition, they track mutations and make sure the kindreds eat in moderation so they don't stray too far away from their natural form, which would lead to evolutionary dead ends. Additionally, KROOT culture developed around their KROOT abilities in interesting ways. Most prominently is that being declared inedible is the greatest shame a KROOT can ever face and is a fate worse than death, since the exile's genes, traits, and spirit is essentially cut off from the future of the KROOT. Another great shame is being a shaper that led their kindred into an evolutionary dead end, since this failure also essentially means the end of their kindred's lineage both physically and spiritually. You see, another cool facet of KROOT culture is how eating slain warriors is actually seen as a great honor. They believe that when a warrior of any species, save the inedibles, is slain, their warrior spirit deserves to live on, and this can be achieved through eating their flesh and inheriting their traits. This is why a KROOT's continued lineage is so important to them. Being denied this is essentially denying their souls an afterlife. But then, even beyond their evolutionary abilities, the KROOT are formidable warriors. Even at a base form, they have incredibly dense muscles and almost hollow bone structure. This allows them to be incredibly strong and nimble despite their seemingly spindly and frail appearance. And in addition to their biological strengths, they also have a proud warrior culture that emphasizes martial skill, especially those related to hunting. KROOT are some of the most vicious and efficient hunters in the galaxy. They are masters of guerrilla warfare, which allows them to keep up with more advanced races. And sometimes they even leverage their more primitive tech to gain an edge in battle. The KROOT are adept in stealth, tracking, and marksmanship. They silently stalk the battlefield, scouting out enemy forces, identifying leaders and key operatives, and then when the time is right, they launch a large ambush. They snipe officers, heavy gunners, and commsmen, unleash volleys of fire to throw enemies into disarray, and bound on foes to engage in vicious melee. Their effectiveness is brought to a zenith when they fight alongside the Tau, since the fire warriors and vehicles provide heavy firepower and can take the brunt of the enemy's punishment, while the KROOT lay low and take out key units and hold off melee combatants. My absolute favorite KROOT moment was during the Damocles Crusade, where they set off a giant EMP as a gambit to take down the Imperial and Tau war machines and then ambush the largely weaponless Imperials. Anyways though, outside of combat and eating, KROOT culture is very family-centric. They live in kindreds and are generally nomadic. KROOT believe their duty as a species is to garner as many beneficial genetic traits as possible. Thus, kindreds travel across the galaxy finding prey to evolve from. And along the way, they help the Tau Empire and also serve as mercenary war bands from time to time. In addition, much like the squats, the KROOT greatly revere their ancestors since they put them on the evolutionary path that they are in the present. Which, come to think about it, the KROOT have many interesting parallels to the Leagues of Votann. No, seriously, think about it. They both love their family, they both revere their ancestors, and at the end of the day, the Votann cores are basically just giant AI shapers. But anyways, back to combat. The KROOT's primary weapon is their creatively named KROOT rifle. And this isn't really a specific weapon, but rather it's just a name for the KROOT's hunting rifle. As such, they can vary from simple slug throwers to modified pulse rifles. But more often than not, the KROOT utilize the upgraded Tau version. A key feature of this gun is the iconic big-ass knife on the end of it. This allows the rifle to double as a fighting staff for when they charge or get charged. In addition to their standard armaments, they've also got some special weapons. Things like the scattergun, KROOT bow, and my favorite of all, the Dvorgite Skinner. This funny, wacky thing is a poached Xeno weapon that shoots streams of energy to flay enemies and is the scariest flamer in Kill Team. And then another fun thing is that the KROOT take in little animal companions for their hunts. The most iconic of these beasts being the KROOT Hounds, the KROOT Hawks, and the KROOT Hawks. Those last two are different, Hawks versus Hawks. But the former two were results of evolutionary dead ends, and the latter was theorized as an ancestral species to the KROOT. But most awesomely of all KROOT beasts is the Gnarlock. These are giant T-Rex looking KROOT that are used as cavalry mounts and are well suited for traversing rough and dense terrain. And even more awesome is the Great Gnarlock, which is even more T-Rex like and can go toe to toe with tanks and other great war machines, which is badass. And if all this stuff about the KROOT sounds interesting to you, the best way to learn more about them would of course be to befriend one and witness their culture firsthand. And you can do so in the upcoming Dark Heresy CRPG. One of the companions you can recruit in Dark Heresy is the KROOT tracker Ra'akti. Ra'akti is an exiled warrior declared inedible by her tribe for breaking sacred traditions. She fought for survival in the toxic marshes of an imperial hive with her cute bird buddy Yuka, until a fateful encounter with an inquisitive inquisitor. In-game, not only will you be able to learn more about why Ra'akti was exiled, but your Inquisitor will have the option to team up with her and be able to venture into a KROOT village to look beyond the KROOT's feral reputation and explore their culture and unique way of life more intimately than ever before. So, if you want to bring your story as an Inquisitor to life and fight alongside a KROOT Huntress, then be sure to check out the Collector's Edition of Dark Heresy to get access to the alpha launch of the game and get an early look at the KROOT village. But overall, that's the basics of the KROOT. They're one of the most unique xenospecies in the setting, and I personally really love their aesthetic of primitive elements clashing with the Tau's futuristic tech. And also, I'm always a sucker for cowboy aesthetics, so that really hits for me. I personally would love to see more Tau auxiliaries get a mini range like the KROOT did, since I've always liked the idea of 40k Covenant, but I'm sure we won't get anything like that for another decade or so here's to hoping. But regardless, let me know what you think of the KROOT, and don't forget to check out Warhammer Dark Heresy if you want to learn more about the KROOT's unique culture and way of life firsthand. Anyways, thank you for watching, and big thanks to the patrons who support the channel. You're all very epic. And as always, please like, comment, subscribe, and consider sharing to all your bird-like crazy aliens. Thanks. KROOT that eat a lot of orcs are called green KROOT, which I think is really fun. Especially since, KROOT by default are usually green.